Lesson 33. Last week we started with the last major subject of the course, the philosophy of the Kleshas, based on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, chapter 2. Philosophy of the Kleshas deals with suffering, mental suffering. And last week what we learned basically is that suffering is something that we can do something about if only we change our perception. And on top of that, we can turn it into something positive through investigation, observation, actually learning very vital and essential lessons in life. And it teaches us who we are. It gives us insight in who we are. It's a very interesting subject. Today we continue reading from the Sutras of Patanjali, chapter 2. Sutra 6. Asmita is the identity or blending together, as it were, of the power of consciousness, Purusha, with the power of cognition. So, last week, after the introduction, we finished with Sutra 5 that addressed the foundation of our suffering. All suffering, all conflict, can be traced back to the first of the Kleshas, which is avidya, ignorance. So here we have the second klesha, asmita, which is ego or egoism. What we are looking at here is something that we have seen before. Egoism is a tamas phenomenon. So here the Patanjali is telling us that out of ignorance we don't look, we don't see clearly, and we confuse consciousness in the crown chakra for ego on a lower level of consciousness. So in the crown chakra, there is your, what is it called? Ahamkara, located. Ahamkara contains your true characteristics, that is yourself with a capital S. So when you are functioning on that higher level, you rise above egoism. And what you perceive is through intuition, through vision. But from the beginning of the course, we have learned that the big tragedy of life is that energy is always condensing. It's always contracting. So a contracting condition in a human being is a natural condition, which means tamas, shine, come in. Come on us. Which means contraction of energy, meaning that our consciousness also is on a lower level of perception. This happens unknowingly. People are not aware of this, and that is why people functioning based on egoism, they are in fact thinking that they are connected with the higher self. So what is the big difference here is that ahamkara, or the self with a capital S, consciousness in the crown chakra, is neutral. There is no judgment there. There is no comparing between me and the other people around me there. So no judgment. But because of the contraction, we function based on ego, lower ego, and that is where we start to compare, because we identify. We identify with the clothes that we wear, we identify with the job that we have, maybe the salary that we earn, our culture, our education. We identify with these kind of things. And based on that, we judge other people. We compare and we judge. Sometimes we are envious, and sometimes we look down upon people. This is all ego. Above ego, in ahamkara, everything and everybody is equal. So the issue that we are dealing with here is really identification. Identification with the situation, identification with our possessions, identification with our image, perceived image. People around us may have a totally different perception. But that is also where arrogance comes from. Thinking that we are superior compared to other people. Or the opposite, inferiority complex. Because we think other people are doing better than we do. When you practice yoga naturally, and you see this in spiritual communities, spiritual circles, naturally people rise above ego and they become more and more non-judgmental. They become more and more compassionate also towards other people, weaker people. They become more and more understanding of other people's imperfections, mistakes. And that also extends to yourself. So you become less of a perfectionist. Remember the story that I told you about going into the subway, seeing a free seat, going to that seat and then being pushed aside. We had a lot of fun talking about that story, but actually what happened, what I described in that situation is first the anger. The anger for being pushed aside and hating that harmony for doing that. But then, as a result of having energy in the crown chakra, your heart opens up and you start to feel that person's soul. And in that moment of clarity, you see the essence of that person and you see where it comes from, that behavior, where that comes from. And you understand that it simply was the only way to survive some decades ago. So instead of anger, you open your heart and you feel compassion for that person.
I'm sorry, but Shani is hesitating to come or not. She's just sitting there. Check it out.
I think so too. Very important to understand here, because it all sounds maybe rather complicated. Important to understand here that it is an energy phenomenon. People who do not do any form of practice that leads to energy rising up, they are kind of stuck in ego and they can't help it. But it is explaining why people tend to get angry, why we end up in conflict. It explains also why we suffer, because we identify with the suffering rather than to see why it is happening and what it is trying to tell us. It's all caused by energy contracting. To reverse this is not something that you can do mentally by trying to technically and theoretically understand how this works. It's an energy phenomenon. What you need to do, and this basically applies to everything that we do with yoga, practice yoga and do it in a correct way, and your consciousness changes. You rise above ego, your energy rises to the crown chakra, and in the crown chakra, you realize your ego. When I was in that subway, my ego was the first to react. Then I rose above my ego, and the moment that I realized what was happening on a lower level, my heart opened up. So it's all about energy, and if you practice regularly, fairly regularly, it is normal that you also function like that. It's not something that you can implement consciously. It's something that happens as a result of your energy being able to rise to higher levels of consciousness, crown chakra. Sutra 7, that attraction which accompanies pleasure is raga. Have you ever heard of raga? Raga is a concept in New Age circles. Raga is New Age music, in fact. And it is called raga because raga means feeling of the current situation. And in very strange terminology, Patanjali here is describing the third klesha, which is attachment. We are attached through emotion. That is raga. How does that, if you talk with Indian people and you mention the word raga, you talk about music. It is a music genre in which you hear, they try to emulate the sound of nature. The sound of a waterfall, the sound of birds singing their songs, the sounds of leaves in the trees rustling because the wind is blowing through, the sounds of the bamboo flute, that nice, soothing New Age music that most of you probably know about. That is basically raga. And if you look at the list of the tunes on a playlist of raga, you see titles like A Walk in the Rain, or A Sunny Day in the Park, or A Stroll in the Snow, or, you know, it's always related to atmosphere, feeling. Here, of course, it goes beyond music and beyond those pleasant kind of things. Raga is your attachment to the neighborhood in which you were born and grew up the first years of your life. What I always do when I go back to the Netherlands, the last time unfortunately is 10 years ago, but before that I would go back every 2-3 years. The first thing that I do is take the bicycle from my mom's shed and go back to my old neighborhood, where all my childhood memories are. Just bicycle ride through the neighborhood. That's raga. You're attached to that. It's not necessarily a bad thing if you are aware of what is happening, because you can become imprisoned by that. The old man in the coffee shop in southern France who can only talk about the German occupiers who imprisoned him or put him to slave labor, that is also raga. A memory to past experiences and not being able to stop talking about it. This is a pure example of raga. Also, when you're in a relationship and a relationship comes to an end and you feel so empty, you feel when going home, you are used to going home to a place where there is somebody waiting for you. And then when that relationship ends, you come home to an empty house. That is raga. You may not even love that person anymore, but you still miss that person's presence, the feeling of coming home. That is raga. Raga is also a huge thing in the Netherlands, is the soccer fans. Amsterdam has its own soccer team, Ajax. Rotterdam has its own soccer team, Feyenoord. They are at war with each other. For what? If you look at it as a third person, it's ridiculous what they are doing. They are sometimes even killing each other. Because my team is better than your team. Because my city is better than your city. That's raga. Attachment to culture, attachment to the group with which you identify, to which you think you belong. And the same issue that I told you about last week or the week before with my sisters, who still belong to an extended group of people that goes back all the way to high school. And it is all they know, basically. 35 years later, they still identify that with that, and they haven't really moved on from it. Stuck in that identification, based on an emotion. That is raga. So, raga in itself is not bad as long as you're conscious of it. But basically that applies to everything in yoga. We are just human. We cannot avoid raga because it is part of who we are and how we function. As long as you're aware of the fact that it can actually limit you enormously in how you grow and unfold your full potential as a human being. I once asked my sisters, because they were involved in entertainment business on TV. They were part of a show ballet group, and because they're special, they were always up front, often on national TV. And when I came to Korea and I saw the opportunities here for people who stand out, I suggested to them to come to Korea together and explore. I was 100% certain that once their presence would be out there in the entertainment industry, they would get a lot of attention from the broadcasting companies here. You know that they do that with foreign people who are special in Korea. So they had a huge potential here. You know what they said? No, I love Amsterdam too much. I wouldn't be able to live without my dear Amsterdam for longer than a couple of weeks when I go on a vacation. Discussion closed. It's attachment. For me, I love Amsterdam too. But it's not important. Because I function on a higher level of consciousness, I realize that if I stay stuck in that idea that Amsterdam is so dear to me, then I will just not go anywhere ever in my life. I will stay put. I will not grow anymore. I will not evolve anymore. And for a normal person or an unconditioned person, it's perfectly fine. It's their safety zone, their comfort zone, their safety bubble. Going out of that bubble is scary. Although they will never say so, they won't even recognize that it is fear that will keep them from going outside of that safety zone or comfort zone. But for me, I lost all my hair out of frustration of being stuck, because I was developing as a yogi, expanding my consciousness, knowing where I should go, what I should do, and then being unable to actually do it. Because it was so complex, because so many obstacles needed to be overcome. Eventually I did. And it is the best thing I ever did in my life. So raga, if you're not aware of it, it limits you into fully becoming who you can be, into employing your potential, into evolving and growing into a more developed, into a more mature being, a dynamic being that is constantly learning and growing and moving forward in your development. So raga is pleasant, enjoy, but do it consciously and do not allow it to become your prison. Do you understand what this is about? I'm trying to give some examples of how it works in practice with my own family members. Maybe you can recognize that either within yourself or with people in your own environment, your own family members or people at work. The last one for this session, that repulsion, Sutra 8, that repulsion which accompanies pain is dvesha. Dvesha is hatred, or I prefer to call it anger. We have seen last week with the introduction that we can use anger as a tool. That's not how it works in normal people. Anger is something that is being triggered because of a situation, because of another person's words or actions, and we have no control, we just explode. And it gives us heartbeats, heart palpitations, it can even give us a heart attack in an extreme case. And it just makes us extremely uncomfortable. Especially as yogis, pay attention that when you allow yourself to end up in a situation, to be dragged into a situation where you explode in anger, it takes days, sometimes weeks, before you recover. Do you recognize this? As a normal human being, getting angry is daily occurrence. You don't even notice anymore. You only notice it maybe when you get extremely angry. But people are angry all the time at small little things, frustrations and what have you. As a yogi, as a yoga practitioner, you learned that as a result of yoga practice, you slowly but certainly eliminate conflicts from your life. It's just a natural thing to do when you become aware of it. Last week we saw that Kriya Yoga is attenuating the kleshas. In other words, as a result of yoga practice, you reduce your misery, including your daily occurring anger. Now, with more time passing, you eliminate more and more those moments where you have no control. So in the beginning you get angry 3 times a day, for example. After a year of yoga practice, maybe you become angry twice a week. And then some years later, it happens only 2 or 3 times a month that you get angry. And when you do, you're aware of it and you try to contain it. You try to transform it. So with time you become less and less emotionally unstable. You become less and less inclined to be angry. So you get used to that nice condition of peace, of sattva. But then something happens. In traffic, maybe somebody cuts you off, or just an unreasonable person crosses your path, picks a fight with you, and there's just a moment that you lose it. And you get angry. You explode in anger. In the past, you explode in anger and you just move on with the rest of your day after the conflict is over. You just move on to your next activity. Now as a yogi, because you're so used to being peaceful, you explode in anger and you stay unsettled, disharmonious for at least the rest of the day. But I've noticed in my situation, it takes days and sometimes even several weeks to be completely in the old condition again. So it is important that you become aware of that, and based on that observation, that you more and more try to avoid it. Because anger can be used as a tool, but it can also become a poison. All emotions, in fact, can become poison. So, we come back to that same story in the subway again. My first reaction was anger. And I was about to explode in anger. And then I switched to a higher level of observation, consciousness, and that anger turned into the opposite. It turned into compassion, understanding. I once heard a monk say, "It just is as it is. Like a cup of water is just a cup of water." That sounds cliche, but it is us. We always have a tendency to put labels on things. This is good. This is bad. And because of, according to that, we have an emotion. We feel good or we feel bad. So what this philosophy means, or this cliche means, it's just as it is. Like a cup of water is just a cup of water. You can apply that to any kind of situation. Because what we are learning here from Patanjali is that whatever it is that happens, what really matters how it affects us is how we interpret it. And the problem that we are facing here is that out of ignorance, lack of consciousness, we are just functioning like human beings and we label things. And as a result, we are like a ping pong ball going between positive emotions and negative emotions, between anger and happiness. Very unstable, in fact. When you become aware of that, you can attenuate it, you can mitigate it, you can reduce those swings left and right between negative and positive emotions. Because in the end, and this is what we've been learning from the beginning of this course, even the things, or maybe especially the things that we label as negative in the first reaction, the first instance, it always has some positive insights to offer. If only we look at it, if only we investigate beyond the emotion, beyond the initial human reaction, if we look a little bit farther than the length of our nose, as we say in Dutch, you actually see that there is some valuable information there. Often, but not always, about ourselves. And in that sense, everything is just as it is. Like a cup of water is just a cup of water. Even better, in this way, with this approach, you turn whatever we initially perceive as something negative, you always be able to turn it into a positive, into a constructive thing. Questions so far? Okay, that was it for this session. We have a new pranayama, but we will discuss the pranayama after the asana practice so that we can integrate it with the nada concentration. Okay, let's have a short break.